In this video help, we're going to be adding information to the invoice order screen. If you recall from a prior video, we explained that there are three groups in the application of screens, and this is the third group and final group. When you want to add an invoice, you click on this button, and it takes you to what we call the Order, Input, Invoice, and Edit. And basically what this is, there'll be a final invoice on here, and I'm going to just pop over and show it to you what it looks like. You click on the standard invoice print, and you can see that this is the actual print invoice we're going to be using, and we've reduced the information down to the minimum as far as what's required for the invoice. Let's go back into the invoice standard, and we'll be working in here to add the information for completing the invoice. Now, what we do, we start out, I'm going to go from the top left and go down through all the items on this screen. It's a little busy. Unfortunately, we have to have the information that is required to do an order invoice. Let me point out one thing. It's very important to do invoices. The reason for it is that you don't want to skip over this step. The reports and the information that are summarized in this application come from the actual invoice. So if you don't do the invoice like you're supposed to, what's going to happen, even though you use Square to take money or something like PayPal, you're still going to end up in a situation where the application does not summarize all the information that needs to be added. So don't leave fields blank. Of course, in this case, maybe the discount is not in it, but you don't leave it blank. You put all the information in. And I'm going to explain how to enter all the information right now. First of all, if you go up to the buyer, let's stop. Let's go over here and say, in the information that you add in here, this is what's called a global field. The global field is for your information of your business, like the name of your business and maybe the website or maybe a telephone number or something like that at the top. Since that's a global field, it'll show up on every invoice that you open and start entering data in next. The same thing goes for your company logo. If you put your logo in here and say, for example, you click and insert something, on the iPad it would say something like insert from photo library. You'd put that in there. Now you may have to work around in size until you get it looking like this one. And what you have down at the bottom of the screen following the cursor, you have a thing that says it's at 100% right now. And on the iPad, you could go ahead and use your touch and spread your fingers to open up and zoom in on everything if you need to see that. On the desktop, what you would do is you would zoom in so you can add information, and now you can see what it looks like more like when you're actually on top of it zoomed in. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to zoom out and come back to this. The first thing you want to do when you open up and add the new invoice is you want to go in and pick the buyer. In this case, when you add more buyers, they're going to have a whole list of them in here. What I would do is if I had a whole bunch, the first thing I would do is I would click back into here when it's blank, and I would go ahead and add the first few characters of the first name of the person. And what it'll do is it'll bring the list up with just people in the list that have those few initials of the first letters in their name. This is a first name and last name type situation. So when you're picking a person, you could start the first few characters. Or you can do like a lot of us do, just click it and scroll down and find the actual person that you're trying to add. Okay, the next thing is when you clicked on the add invoice, the invoice number was added. Each time you add a new invoice, it'll step by one to the next invoice number. The invoice data will be added to the invoice, and then if you picked the person, their data for the address, city, state, and zip will be added automatically. If you're going to ship this item to somebody, and maybe it's a large item like a chair, table, whatever, you would go ahead and put their ship to address in this block. Now, if you're shipping and it's a large item, what you can do is go to uship.com, click on this, read their terms and conditions, and then if you add the information that they require for whatever you're shipping, they will come back with multiple bids from different carriers to go ahead and ship the item for you. They will come to your business, pick up the item, they would wrap it, and then take it. That next thing you would need to do is obviously you would either take a deposit for the ship initially, and a lot of times you can actually call these people if you have to and give them the dimensions so you can get an actual shipping price. After you're doing this for a while, I'm sure you probably know pretty close what the exact shipping would be. If you add the shipping in here, instead it doesn't go in this area here, what it would do is you'd put it in, and what it will do is add it to the invoice total. The reason it's added separately is the shipping is not taxable. So we tax it, the items down here, but we don't tax shipping. The invoice, as far as what we're looking at here, has the subtotal, which comes from the information that you put in the rows here. When you have the subtotal, if you put in tax by clicking over here and picking a tax that you're going to be using, what you can do is edit this and change and put your tax in here that you have. There's a couple of them in there for samples, but you would go ahead and replace this and put what you pay for tax on items. Now, because this is a row by row tax, what it's going to do is you can select tax if an item's taxed. If it's not taxed, you just leave it blank, and that way it won't calculate the tax for each row item. The next thing we're looking at, once you have your tax in there and you have your shipping, it'll give you a invoice total. And then over here, you would see how much the person has paid for this. Maybe they put it on layaway, for example. And you can see that when you look over here on this status, they have a hold. Maybe they want to hold the item until they can come back because they need to get something else for it. Maybe they don't have their all the money at this point. You can do a layaway, holding, and then you can go ahead and put that in there as far as what it is. Now, sold is mandatory. When you're calculating this, you have to either have sold in here in order to generate the commissions, or it would be sold store. Sold store is for your business. If you're the client owner and this is your consigned item, then that's what you would put in there. And how would you tell if you're the item person? Here's the consignor ID and the item ID. The consignor ID is important. That's your store ID if you're the owner of the store. If it's somebody else as a consignor ID, you'll click and the consignor ID would be down here, and it would have a description of the actual item. And in this, I just put no description because the item is in this record does not have a description. So, and this, by the way, when you put in the consignor ID, it will automatically add the data for this record, and then you would pick the item ID, and the item ID would list all the items, and it'd have the item ID on this side. So we have consignor ID and item ID. When you pick both of those, what it's going to do, it's going to automatically fill in most of the information in here. The key things that are in here up to this point are the items that you see in here now. This should default to quantity of one. So if you have more than a quantity of one, go ahead and click in that field. Say, for example, it's two of the same items that you're going to be selling, and they would have different item IDs. You would put one, and if it's a multiple thing where you can sell items in multiple if you want to, because if you put two in here, it's just going to double the amount that is the standard selling price for this item. And you can also add a discount if you want to discount it for whatever reason. Say the buyer asks for a discount, or you're offering a discount on your time sequencing thing that we set up in the item thing. Now, what happens to do that, if you look over here, you'll see a days since listing. What that is, now this is an item that sold a long time ago. This we saw in one of our prior videos where this sequences. What happens if you're selling something where you discount it at 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days, this you could look up here for each item that you add, and you're going to see where it says what is the current amount of days that this thing has been in your store in inventory. So you're going to see anywhere from 1 day to 90 days. It will continue to go until if it gets to 90 days or even up to 104 and you sell it, 90 would be the time that the person would get a sold. And then everything after 90 days would be sold store, because the actual thing would be if you had it donated to you or you sold it after the 90 days is up, which is in your contract that we just talked about. If it's after 90 days, it actually should belong to the store if the consignor does not come in and pick it up or declare to donate it. You got to be very careful now when you're doing this. Your contract should explain exactly how you're going to treat everything after 90 days. You can still sell it until they bring it in, and then you can do what you want to do as a store owner if you're going to give them the consignor a discount, or not a discount, but a commission on that item. It's up to you. Using sold, it'll go commission to the consignor, sold store, the commission will go to the store. In this particular case, this will continue to run. It doesn't stop, and it doesn't make any difference if it's sold and it's on an invoice where it's sold. It doesn't. You don't really care if it's 655 days or not because it's already sold. And on the actual item, if you pop over here, and I'm going to go to it, if you need information that's not available to you and you don't have that data in here, what you can do is you can come in and look at the actual listed item here. This is 1 and 1. This is all the information you need that came from the actual listing, so you can see everything that pertains to that particular item. And this gives you the ability to look at what the actual price should be if it's at 30, 60, or 90 days. If you look at your days since listed and it's 30, 60, or 90, you can pop over on this and look and see what it actually should sell for. If you want to do it as you declare in your contract, what would happen is if this was 30, 60, or 90 days, just take a look at this to see what the actual price should be that overrides the standard price. So at 30.78, when I look at this, if I pop over here and look at it, you'll see after 30 days, it's supposed to be 27.20, 24, and so forth, going down. And I believe we got, okay, in this particular case, you're going to see 10, 20, and 30% is the discount. You'll see it starts a little high, drops until the 90th day, and then you should be contacting the consignor to remove the item from your store or whatever you set up in the contract. For example, if you have a consignor and they say, well, I'm never going to come back and get these things, then you want to make sure that when you do their contract, you say that they forfeit them at 90 days. After 90 days, you own the item. And this is a standard thing. You can also do this. If they don't come in within the 15 days after 90, which is 104 days, it automatically becomes your property, and then that's when you'd be using the sold store in this, so you would get the commission for the item if it's sold after 90 days. Okay, let's go back. This, I'm going to repeat, is the actual sell price with the buyer's fee. The buyer's fee we explained before is whatever you put on in this record over here. Let's pop back over and look at that. The buyer's fee in this case was 99 cents. You can put whatever you want there that is added to the price and put into the the sell price with buyer's fee. Now the buyer's fee goes to your store, and when the client pays for it, the item here is the standard price plus buyer's fee. If you do not put a buyer's fee on it, it's going to be whatever you assign to it in the actual record. So for example, if I come up here and a sold at price should have been 20, okay, it says item sell price is 30.29, and in this particular case, you go back over here and it added a little bit of money to it for 99 cents, and then you have the additional price. When you get this record open and you pick the item ID, it's going to automatically put this price over here. Then you copy it over here. Just type it in, 30.78. You do not have to add this. You should change this to sold. Just clicking on this field will put today in there. Now, if I clicked on it right now, it would go ahead and put the current date in. And then you would pick if it's going to be taxed or not. And then it'll summarize the tax if you put them in there. So that's all the information that you need in this particular area. If you're going to use Square, I want to point out that Square is fine. It's a great product. We actually added a piece of information for each one of these items in the actual record where it has a SKU. If I go over here, you can see that it has a SKU for each item in the for that product. And the SKU is used, pardon me, this is not on this particular screen. You'd have to go back to the main screen for your SKU. But it is on the record in the main portal for this, where there's a SKU which combines these two numbers with a dash between them. And that would be used if you have to use a SKU on anything like Square. And as I said, you need to put all the data in here, because if you're exporting items out of the item screen where you're setting up the information for Square, where you set your things up and you pick the items in Square, you have an option for loading it into Square or just using the summary total and adding it. And so when you strike the card, it's going to go ahead and pay to you that particular amount. It'll take the information from the person's credit card that they use and go ahead and put it into Square. and then you would get the report from Square. Now, obviously, you have to realize if you don't put all the information in the invoice and they don't buy through Square, you have to have something, or PayPal, you have to be able to know exactly what was done, and that Square and PayPal may send you a statement, or you can use it in PayPal or in Square. You still have to account for all the items that were cash buys. So make sure you fill in all the information on each row for the items that you're doing. For example, if I click, I can do another one and another row and another row. Now, if for some reason you need to remove a row because it was in error, go to the portal, which you have to be on a portal that has something in it. You go to the portal and you can delete that row record in this screen right here. So you can get back and go back to the invoice. When it's removed, this row would be taken out of the particular invoice that you're working on. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to say a transaction has been created, and we have one item we're going to be selling. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down here, and this is how we're going to take the payment for it, which is a separate set of records and reports. What's going to happen is you would pick, the item would automatically be entered in as far as the item itself for payment ID. The payment ID matches the invoice ID. If you put it on a different screen with a different invoice ID, then this would come to a different one. You would click and put in the date when you're taking the payment. You would go ahead and take the amount that is paid or due. In this case, it was due. 3078 is what's supposed to be due. And this should have said, in this case, 3078 on it, or the final up here is the 3078 would have gone in here. Once you put 3078, that's what's due. And what it'll do, you can see it automatically told you that there was amount due if you didn't pay the whole amount. So in this particular case, you would have to put the amount in here. To wipe this out, you put in 3078 if you're going to take it all in at one time, and then it would say 0 here, and then you can click this to put in there how it was actually, the money was taken in. And you can edit this by clicking on it and adding something else if you're taking money in another way. In this case, it's supposed to be a check. So going back here, say for example, they made a payment to hold it and it's not sold yet. So you can put it on hold and leave it here, and the next time they come in to pick up the item, you can return to this screen for invoice by doing a search for invoice number 1. You come down here and you see that there's a balance of $16.79. What you would do is put the next date in here for the date they're going to actually take it. Put in the amount due as $16.79 here. Then you go ahead and pay the $16.79, the amount paid, and what will happen, it'll go to 0 here as far as the item is now sold, and it should zero out the amount as far as the balance that's due. In this case, the invoice payment balance is now $16.79. So when you do that, this will turn to 0, and the next row that you added will also be 0. So another way is if this is layaway, pardon me, and they're doing layaway, you'd do the same thing. Every time they make a payment, you would continue by taking the last balance and put it in for the balance payment due, and then do as many of those as you have to. Okay, now this little guy over here in the corner is another scroll bar, but what it does is we have 2 invoices so far in the system. This scrolls up and down, and actually scrolls pretty quickly when you get it full. What you can do is go ahead and click on the blue thing here to change from one invoice to the other. If you watch up at the top of the screen, you're going to see that I go to invoice number 2. So I'm in invoice number 2 now. With invoice number 2, now you have all the information here that this invoice date, the amount sum paid, and the balance that's due. In this case, this one has $31.78 due. Let's go through the different buttons that are available here. We have one for the list view of all the invoices that are currently listed. You can go in here if you need to do a search for a particular invoice or information related to that. And of course, in this case, you can see the individual record where there's actually still money owed on them. And down at the bottom, you see the total for all the invoices currently on the screen, all the taxes, the shipping, the sum of paid of all the items, and then the balance owed. If there is a balance owed, these fields will be red, If they pay them, then they'll turn back to white again. So this is a very easy way to go in and find all the invoices that still have a balance on them. You can also sort the records by going in here and using the sort. What it'll do is it'll allow you to sort by the individual record using the sort. If you want to review the actual record that you want to go back into, click the edit. It'll take you back into that record. We still obviously have the app map and the do action buttons. We have when we want to go ahead and print. We would go ahead and click on the invoice standard print, and you can see the item here that's going to be printed as far as the invoice is concerned. You can also take a payment in here if you want to and fill in the information just like if it were in the other screen. Or you can review it here if you have to and show that the balance is in here. And you can do that if you're getting ready to take a payment and all you'd want to do is to go to the standard screen and go ahead and add data. And let's go back into the invoice standard, which will take us back over here that we can now see the work input edit one. And what we would do is say, for example, I wanted to see the long invoice report. I would go over here. And what this is the actual report and also the long form print. What this basically does, it acts like the standard invoice print. But what this one does is give you all the records, like a report of all the records basically in here. And you can watch this. If I see an invoice 1 over here, if I come over and click on invoice 2, it'll take me to invoice number 2. If I wanted to have all the records from, say, for example, a specific client, buyer, or whatever, as far as the buyer is concerned, I can see everything that they've ever ordered if you have their buyer information in this screen. You can go ahead and pick it. When you go into, you first go into the search mode, then pick this, and then all the invoices for that particular person will come up. If you're looking for a particular invoice at, say, for example, a certain period of times or months or something like that, what you can do is you can go ahead and put that formula in where you're looking for a date range, put the date range in for the month, and it would come up. And then each invoice that you want to view of all the ones that are going to show on the screen, you click on it and it would show that. What happens, there's one line in each one of these. If you have an invoice with 6, 10, 12, 15 items, what's going to happen is you click on it, it's going to show that many items for you to see for that invoice. It's best probably to just go up here and do the do action search and put an invoice number here and then go ahead and perform the search. And that way you'll see the record if it's got a lot of items in it. And in the same way, this is how you actually print the invoice in a long invoice. The reason you have to use a long invoice is the standard invoice will not print over 10 items. Through our research with all of our people that are using the consignment application, they say they get maybe 7 to 10 people total items on one invoice, where this one's infinite. You can put 100 items on here if you wanted to on one invoice item. Go ahead and do the search for that item. Let's just go ahead and do it while we're here. Let's say start the search, put the one in, go ahead then and say perform it. And now you're looking at the invoice for invoice number 1. So it's not that hard to do it. And then if you click on here, you're going to be coming back to invoice number 1. And then you have also a list view portal for invoice lists portal. You click on that and it actually uses the same report and comes up with the information for a report if you want to run one. In this case, it's running the one for the record that you picked. Now realize that we're still in the mode where we're in find mode. If you went to the list view and looked in here, you're going to see the only record that is actually here is the one you did when you selected that particular item and did the search. Now to go back and edit the record, come over here and say show all records. And what will happen is now when I go back to the list view, all the records will be there. And in the list view over here, you can see all the records are now back again. So if you had 30, 100, 1,000, they would all be returned. So you can do another search if you want to. Now another option you have is if you want to look at a particular invoice by what I just showed you. If you want to look to a particular invoice, what you can do is do the search in here, pick the record, and then go back the reverse way to the record here. And what it should do, and the list view should also be only that record that you picked. So if I went and did a search for invoice number 2 in that screen, then that's what's going to be showing over here. Okay, this pretty well, let's go to the portal though. I want to go in here and show you this. The portal is the individual record we talked about before, and you can see the age of the item. Up here you'll see a thing that says Invoice Portal View List. This is the one for the portal itself only. So what you have in here now are all the items that are in the portal. If you had to, say for example, import or export records and you wanted to import them based on whatever, say like for example, all of them, part of them, you would do a search for whatever parts of these records you want to export. And say for example, you want to send these to, say maybe go to a report that you want to file away or whatever, you can have it for any date range you want using the item sold date. And you can also add other things to it. For example, if you're looking for specific items like items there, the status is, let's see, category. They would all be in there. And one of the things I want to point out, if you click on this one, it actually goes to the edit portal, and this one goes to the invoice. So you have an action when you take it. And then I was going to talk about category. If you want to look for a particular category of an item, you can come in here and do the search and then pick the item or add the ones that you want added to this. It's only got a few in there right now. That way you could go in and for looking at record history, you could see every time these items sold and what invoice they sold on, and you can go view them and look at the information that you want to and do a trend analysis if that's what you want to do. And in this, it has a special little thing here. This is the combo record ID that you see in the records that are in the input place for adding items, and it breaks down several fields and put them all in one. If you click on it, it's going to expand and you can see the rest of the information that's in there for that particular item. So that's a nice thing to have. Okay, let's go back to the edit invoice. We're down in here. We're going to go back. We're going to go to standard invoice, and there you go. But I want to go back to standard invoice and click on long invoice report. You can also go from that window. Okay, now let's go ahead and review shortly what we did. We just went through the following. We started in the order invoice input. We went to the invoice list view. We looked at the invoice payment, the payment list view, the order invoice portal, the invoice standard, and long. So let's go to the invoice portal over here. This is the one that had the records in it. I'm just going to point out, I'm going to come jumping over here and I'm going to say show all records. And in this particular case, it only has one record in it in that one portal. If you have more items in that portal, like what's on the invoice, it's going to list them down here. And this is another different one you can run for the actual portal items to export or import stuff in. Most of the time when you import stuff, that's going to be something that the developer will do because it's kind of complex to do. So if you need help with that, you can contact the developer and they can help you. I want to point out that you cannot import data into the iPad. In the wisdom of Apple, they did not give you the ability to import into the iPad. Okay, so while you're in this screen, I want to point out too that when you do a search, if you need a drop down like the one that does the date, some of these fields are actually set up with drop downs, so you can use them if you want to say everything that was say for example a Visa payment that was for all the items that were ever purchased. You can see all the items that were Visa payments. Or say for example there was a question about somebody that used a Visa and they don't know what their number is. It's a good idea to go back to the comment area. If you so do, you can go into the comment area of the portal and put something in there as far as why or how the thing was done. In this case, it was by check. Okay, now we're looking at the individual rows for the portal, for the payment portal. Okay, if you have any questions, and you certainly would probably in this, it's kind of complex. There's a lot of information going on in here. Contact us through the website, ontargetsolutions.biz, and we're going to be happy to answer any of your questions that you may have. Thank you.